Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's Stories. We now return to Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Part 1, Chapter 16. In the cold gray dawn, the sisters lit their lamp and read their chapter with an earnestness never felt before. For now the shadow of a real trouble had come. The little books were full of help and comfort, and as they dressed, they agreed to say goodbye cheerfully and hopefully and send their mother on her anxious journey unsaddened by tears or complaints from them. Everything seemed very strange when they went down, so dim and still outside, so full of light and bustle within. Breakfast at that early hour seemed odd, and even Hannah's familiar face looked unnatural as she flew about her kitchen with her nightcap on. The big trunk stood ready in the hall. Mother's cloak and bonnet lay on the sofa, and Mother herself sat trying to eat, but looking so pale and wan with sleeplessness and anxiety that the girls found it very hard to keep their resolution. Meg's eyes kept filling in spite of herself. Jo was obliged to hide her face in the kitchen roller more than once, and the little girls wore a grave, troubled expression, as if sorrow was a new experience to them. Nobody talked much, but as the time drew very near, they sat waiting for the carriage. Mrs. March said to the girls, who were all busied about her, one folding her shawl, another smoothing out the strings of her bonnet, a third putting on her overshoes, and a fourth fastening up her traveling bag. Children, I leave you to Hannah's care and Mr. Lawrence's protection. Hannah is faithfulness itself. And our good neighbor will guard you as if you were his own. I have no fears for you, yet I am anxious that you should take this trouble rightly. Don't grieve and fret when I am gone, or think that you can be idle and comfort yourselves by being idle and trying to forget. Go on with your work as usual, for work is a blessed solace. Hope and keep busy, and whatever happens, remember that you never can be fatherless. Yes, Mother. Meg, dear, be prudent. Watch over your sisters. Consult Hannah, and in any perplexity, go to Mr. Lawrence. Be patient, Jo. Don't get despondent and do rash things. Write to me often, and be my brave girl, ready to help and cheer all. Beth, comfort yourself with your music, and be faithful to the little home duties. And you, Amy, help all you can. Be obedient and keep happy safe at home. We will, Mother, we will. The rattle of an approaching carriage made them all start and listen. That was the hard minute, but the girls stood it well. No one cried, no one ran away or uttered a lamentation, though their hearts were very heavy as they sent loving messages to Father, remembering as they spoke that it might be too late to deliver them. They kissed their mother quietly, clung about her tenderly, and tried to wave their hands cheerfully when she drove away. Laurie and his grandfather came over to see her off, and Mr. Brooke looked so strong and sensible and kind that the girls christened him Mr. Greatheart on the spot. Goodbye, my darlings. God bless and keep us all, whispered Mrs. March as she kissed one dear little face after the other and hurried into the carriage. As she rolled away, the sun came out, and looking back, she saw it shining on the group at the gate like a good omen. They saw it also, and smiled and waved their hands, and the last thing she beheld as she turned the corner was the 4 bright faces, and behind them, like a bodyguard, old Mr. Lawrence, faithful Hannah, and devoted Laurie. "How kind everyone is to us," she said, turning to find fresh proof of it in the respectful sympathy of the young man's face. "I don't see how they can help it," returned Mr. Brooke, laughing so infectiously that Mrs. March could not help smiling. And so the journey began with the good omens of sunshine, smiles, and cheerful words. "I feel as if there had been an earthquake," said Joe, as their neighbors went home to breakfast, leaving them to rest and refresh themselves. "It seems as if half the house was gone," added Meg forlornly. Beth opened her lips to say something, but could only point to the pile of nicely mended hose which lay on Mother's table, showing that even in her last hurried moments she had thought and worked for them. It was a little thing, but it went straight to their hearts, and in spite of their brave resolutions, they all broke down and cried bitterly. Hannah wisely allowed them to relieve their feelings, and when the shower showed signs of clearing up, she came to the rescue, armed with a coffee pot. "Now, my dear young ladies, remember what your ma said, and don't fret. Come and have a cup of coffee all around, and then let's fall to work and be a credit to the family." Coffee was a treat, and Hannah showed great tact in making it that morning. No one could resist her persuasive nods, or the fragrant invitation issuing from the nose of the coffee pot. They drew up to the table, exchanged their handkerchiefs for napkins, and in 10 minutes were all right again. Hope and keep busy. That's the motto for us, so let's see who will remember it best. I shall go to Aunt March as usual. "Oh, won't she lecture, though," said Joe, as she sipped with returning spirit. "I shall go to my Kings, though I'd much rather stay home and attend to things here," said Meg, wishing she hadn't made her eyes so red. "No need of that. Beth and I can keep house perfectly well," put in Amy with an important air. "Hannah will tell us what to do, and we'll have everything nice when you come home," added Beth, getting out her mop and dish tub without delay. "I think anxiety is very interesting," observed Amy, eating sugar pensively. The girls couldn't help laughing and felt better for it, though Meg shook her head at the young lady who could find consolation in a sugar bowl. The sight of the turnovers made Joe sober again, and when the two went out to their daily tasks, they looked sorrowfully back at the window where they were accustomed to see their mother's face. But it was gone. But Beth had remembered the little household ceremony, and there she was, nodding away at them like a rosy-faced mandarin. That's so like my Beth," said Joe, waving her hat with a graceful face. "Goodbye, Maggie. I hope the Kings won't strain today. Don't fret about Father, dear," she added as they parted. "And I hope Aunt March won't croak. Your hair is becoming, and it looks very boyish and nice," returned Meg, trying not to smile at the curly head which looked comically small on her tall sister's shoulders. "That's my only comfort," and touching her hat a la Laurie, away went Joe, feeling like a shorn sheep on a wintry day. News from their father comforted the girls very much, for though dangerously ill, the presence of the best and tenderest of nurses had already done him good. Mr. Brooke sent a bulletin every day, and as the head of the family, Meg insisted on reading the dispatches, which grew more cheerful as the week passed. At first, everyone was eager to write, and plump envelopes were carefully poked into the letterbox by one or other of the sisters, who felt rather important with their Washington correspondence. As one of these packets contained characteristic notes from the party, "We will rob an imaginary mail and read them. My dearest mother, it is impossible to tell you how happy your last letter made us, for the news was so good we couldn't help laughing and crying over it. How very kind Mr. Brooke is, and how fortunate that Mr. Lawrence's business detains him near you so long, since he is so useful to you and father. The girls are all good as gold. Joe helps me with the sewing and insists on doing all sorts of hard jobs. I should be afraid she might overdo if I didn't know her moral fit wouldn't last long. Beth is as regular about her tasks as a clock, and never forgets what you told her. She grieves about father, and looks sober except when she is at her little piano. Amy minds me nicely, and I take great care of her. She does her own hair, and I'm teaching her to make buttonholes and mend her stockings. She tries very hard, and I know you will be pleased with her improvement when you come. Mr. Lawrence watches over us like a motherly old hen, as Joe says. And Laurie is very kind and neighborly. He and Joe keep us merry, for we get pretty blue sometimes and feel like orphans with you so far away. Hannah is a perfect saint. She does not scold at all and always calls me Miss Margaret, which is quite proper, you know, and treats me with respect. We are all well and busy, but we long day and night to have you back. Give my dearest love to father, and believe me, ever your own, Meg. This note, pretty written on scented paper, was a great contrast to the next, which was scribbled on a big sheet of thin foreign paper, ornamented with blots and all manner of flourishes and curly-tailed letters. My precious Mommy, 3 cheers for dear father. Brooke was a trump to telegraph right off and let us know the minute he was better. I rushed up garret when the letter came and tried to thank God for being so good to us, but I could only cry and say, I'm glad, I'm glad. Didn't that do as well as a regular prayer? For I felt a great many in my heart. We have such funny times, and now I can enjoy them, for everyone is so desperately good. It's like living in a nest of turtle doves. You'd laugh to see Meg head the table and try to be motherish. She gets prettier every day, and I'm in love with her sometimes. The children are regular archangels, and I'm Joe, and never shall be anything else. Oh, I must tell you that I came near having a quarrel with Laurie. I freed my mind about a silly little thing, and he was offended. I was right, but didn't speak as I ought, and he marched home saying he wouldn't come again till I begged pardon. I declared I wouldn't and got mad. It lasted all day. I felt bad and wanted you very much. Laurie and I are both so proud, it's hard to beg pardon, but I thought he'd come to it, for I was in the right. He didn't come, and just that night I remembered what you said when Amy fell into the river. I read my little book, felt better, resolved not to let the sun set on my anger, and ran over to tell Laurie I was sorry. I met him at the gate, coming for the same thing. We both laughed, begged each other's pardon, and felt all good and comfortable again. I made a poem yesterday when I was helping Hannah wash, and as father likes my silly little things, I put it in to amuse him. Give him my lovingest hug that ever was, and kiss yourself a dozen times for your topsy-turvy Joe. A song from the Suds. Queen of my tub, I merrily sing, while the white foam rises high, and sturdily wash and rinse and wring, and fasten the clothes to dry. Then out in the free, fresh air they swing, under the sunny sky. I wish we could wash from our hearts and souls the stains of the week away, and let water and air by their magic make ourselves as pure as they. Then on the earth there would be indeed a glorious washing day. Along the path of a useful life we will heart cease ever bloom. Along the path of a useful life will heart cease ever bloom. The busy mind has no time to think of sorrow or care or gloom, and anxious thoughts may be swept away as we bravely wield a broom. I am glad for a task to give. I am glad a task to me is given to labor at day by day, for it brings me health and strength and hope, and I cheerfully learn to say, head you may think, heart you may feel, but hand you shall work alway. Dear mother, there's only room for me to send my love and some pressed pansies from the root I have been keeping safe in the house for father to see. I read every morning, try to be good all day, and sing myself to sleep with father's tune. I can't sing Land of the Leal now, it makes me cry. Everyone is very kind, and we are as happy as we can be without you. Amy wants the rest of the page, so I must stop. I didn't forget to cover the holders, and I wind the clock in other rooms every day. Kiss dear father on the cheeks he calls mine. Oh, do come soon to your loving little Beth. Ma chérie mama, we are all well. I do my lessons always and never corroborate the girls. Meg says I mean contradict, so I put in both words and you can take the properest. Meg is a great comfort to me and lets me have jelly every night at tea. It's so good for me, Joe says, because it keeps me sweet-tempered. Laurie is not as respectful as he ought to be now I am almost in my teens. He calls me chick and hurts my feelings by talking French to me very fast when I say merci or bonjour as Haiti King does. The sleeves of my blue dress were all worn out and Meg put in new ones, but the full front came wrong and they are more blue than the dress. I felt bad but did not fret. I bear my troubles well, but I do wish Hannah would put more starch in my aprons and have buckwheats every day. Can't she? Didn't I make that interrogation point nice? Meg says my punctuation and spelling are disgraceful and I am mortified. But dear me, I have so many things to do I can't stop. Adieu. I send heaps of love to Papa. Your affectionate daughter, Amy Curtis March. Dear Miss March, I just drop a line to say we get on first rate. The girls is clever and fly round right smart. Miss Meg is going to make a proper good housekeeper. She hears the liking for it and gets the hang of things surprising quick. Joe does beat all for going ahead, but she don't stop to calculate first, and you never know where she's like to bring up. She done out a tub of clothes on Monday, but she starched them afore they was wretched, and blued a pink calico dress till I thought I should have died a laughing. Beth is the best of the little creeters, and a sight of help to me, being so fore-handed and dependable. She tries to learn everything and really goes to market beyond her years, likewise keeps accounts with my help, quite wonderful. We have got on very economical so far. I don't let the girls have coffee only once a week according to your wish and keep 'em on plain wholesome vitals. Amy does well without fretting, wearing her best clothes and eating sweet stuff. Mr. Laurie is as full of didos as usual and turns the house upside down frequent, but he heartens the girls, so I let 'em have full swing. The old gentleman send heaps of things and is rather wearing, but means wow. And it ain't my place to say nothing. My bread is riz, so no more at this time. I send my duty to Mr. March and hope he's seen the last of his pneumonia. Yours respectful, Hannah Mullet, head nurse of Ward Number 2. All serene on the Rappahannock. Troops in fine condition. Commissary department well conducted. The Home Guard under Colonel Teddy always on duty. Commander-in-Chief General Lawrence reviews the army daily. Quartermaster Mullet keeps order in the camp. And Major Lyon does picket duty at night. A salute of 24 guns was fired on receipt of good news from Washington, and a dress parade took place at headquarters. Commander-in-Chief sends best wishes, in which he is heartily joined by Colonel Teddy. Dear Madam, the little girls are all well. Beth and my boy report daily. Hannah is a model servant, and God's pretty Meg like a dragon. Glad the fine weather holds. Pray make Brooke useful and draw on me for funds if expenses exceed your estimate. Don't let your husband want anything. Thank God he is mended. Your sincere friend and servant, James Lawrence. Chapter 17. Little Faithful. For a week, the amount of virtue in the old house would have supplied the neighborhood. It was really amazing, for everyone seemed in a heavenly frame of mind, and self-denial was all the fashion. Relieved of their first anxiety about their father, girls insensibly relaxed their praiseworthy efforts a little, and began to fall back into old ways. They did not forget their motto, but hoping and keeping busy seemed to grow easier, and after such tremendous exertions, they felt that endeavor deserved a holiday, and gave it a good many. Joe caught a bad cold through neglect to cover the shorn head enough, and was ordered to stay at home till she was better. For Aunt March didn't like to hear people read with colds in their heads. Joe liked this, and after an energetic rummage from garret to cellar, subsided on the sofa to nurse her cold with arsenicum and books. Amy found that housework and art did not go well together, and returned to her mud pies. Meg went daily to her pupils, and sewed, or thought she did, at home, but much time was spent in writing long letters to her mother, or reading the Washington dispatches over and over. Beth kept on with only slight relapses into idleness or grieving. All the little duties were faithfully done each day, and many of her sisters also, for they were forgetful, and the house seemed like a clock whose pendulum was gone a-visiting. When her heart got heavy with longings for mother or fears for father, she went away into a certain closet, hid her face in the folds of a dear old gown, and made her little moan, and prayed her little prayer quietly by herself. Nobody knew what cheered her up after a sober fit, but everyone felt how sweet and helpful Beth was, and fell into a way of going to her for comfort or advice in their small affairs. All were unconscious that this experience was a test of character, and when the first excitement was over, felt that they had done well and deserved praise, for they did, but their mistake was in ceasing to do well, and they learned this lesson through much anxiety and regret. Meg, I wish you'd go and see the Hummels. You know Mother told us not to forget them, said Beth, 10 days after Mrs. March's departure. I'm too tired to go this afternoon, replied Meg, rocking comfortably as she sewed. Can't you, Joe? Asked Beth. Too stormy for me with my cold. I thought it was almost well. It's well enough for me to go out with Laurie, but not well enough to go to the Hummels, said Joe, laughing. But looking a little ashamed of her inconsistency. Why don't you go yourself? Asked Meg. I have been every day, but the baby is sick, and I don't know what to do for it. Mrs. Hummel goes away to work. The Lottchen takes care of it, but it gets sicker and sicker. I think you or Hannah ought to go. Beth spoke earnestly, and Meg promised she would go tomorrow. Ask Hannah for some nice little mess, and take it round, Beth. The air will do you good, said Joe, adding apologetically, I'd go, but I want to finish my writing. My head aches and I'm tired, so I thought maybe some of you would go, said Beth. Amy will be in presently, and she will run down for us, suggested Meg. So Beth lay on the sofa, and the others returned to their work, and the Hummels were forgotten. An hour passed. Amy did not come. Meg went to her room to try on a new dress. Joe was absorbed in her story, and Hannah was sound asleep before the kitchen fire when Beth quietly put on her hood, filled her basket with odds and ends for the poor children, and went out into the chilly air with a heavy head and a grieved look in her patient eyes. It was late when she came back, and no one saw her creep upstairs and shut herself into her mother's room. Half an hour after, Joe went to Mother's closet for something, and there found little Beth sitting on the medicine chest, looking very grave, with red eyes and a camphor bottle in her hand. Christopher Columbus, what's the matter? Cried Joe, as Beth put out her hand as if to warn her off, and asked quickly, You've had the scarlet fever, haven't you? Years ago, when Meg did. Why? Then I'll tell you. Oh, Joe, the baby's dead. What baby? Mrs. Hummel's. It died in my lap before she got home, cried Beth with a sob. My poor dear, how dreadful for you. I ought to have gone, said Joe, taking her sister in her arms as she sat down in her mother's big chair with a remorseful face. It wasn't dreadful, Joe, only so sad. I saw in a minute it was sicker, but Lottchen said her mother had gone for a doctor, so I took baby and let Lottie rest. It seemed asleep, but all of a sudden it gave a little cry and trembled, and then lay very still. I tried to warm its feet, and Lottie gave it some milk, but it didn't stir, and I knew it was dead. Don't cry, dear. What did you do? I just sat and held it softly till Mrs. Hummel came with the doctor. He said it was dead and looked at Heinrich and Mina, who had sore throats. Scarlet fever, ma'am. Ought to have called me before, he said crossly. Mrs. Hummel told him she was poor and had tried to cure baby herself, but now it was too late, and she could only ask him to help the others and trust to charity for his pay. He smiled then and was kinder, but it was very sad, and I cried with them till he turned round all of a sudden and told me to go home and take belladonna right away, or I'd have the fever. No, you won't, cried Joe, hugging her close with a frightened look. Oh, Beth, if you should be sick, I never could forgive myself. What shall we do? Don't be frightened. I guess I shan't have it badly. I looked in Mother's book and saw that it begins with headache, sore throat, and queer feelings like mine. So I did take some belladonna, and I feel better, said Beth, laying her cold hands on her hot forehead and trying to look well. If Mother was only at home, exclaimed Joe, seizing the book and feeling that Washington was an immense way off. She read a page, looked at Beth, felt her head, peeped into her throat, and then said gravely, You've been over the baby every day for more than a week, and among the others who are going to have it. So I'm afraid you are going to have it, Beth. I'll call Hannah. She knows all about sickness. Don't let Amy come. She never had it, and I should hate to give it to her. Can't you and Meg have it over again? Asked Beth anxiously. I guess not. I don't care if I do. I guess not. Don't care if I do. Serve me right, selfish pig, to let you go and stay writing rubbish myself, muttered Joe as she went to consult Hannah. The good soul was wide awake in a minute and took the lead at once, assuring that there was no need to worry. Everyone had scarlet fever, and if rightly treated, nobody died, all of which Joe believed and felt much relieved as they went up to call Meg. Now I'll tell you what we'll do, said Hannah when she had examined and questioned Beth. We'll have Dr. Bangs just to take a look at you, dear, and see that we start right. Then we'll send Amy off to Aunt March's for a spell to keep her out of harm's way, and one of you girls can stay at home and amuse Beth for a day or two. I shall stay, of course. I'm the oldest, began Meg, looking anxious and self-reproachful. I shall, because it's my fault she's sick. I told Mother I'd do the errands and I haven't, said Joe decidedly. Which will you have, Beth? There ain't no need of but one, said Hannah. Joe, please. And Beth leaned her head against her sister with a contented look, which effectually settled that point. I'll go and tell Amy, said Meg, feeling a little hurt, yet rather relieved on the whole, for she did not like nursing, and Joe did. Amy rebelled outright and passionately declared that she had rather have the fever than go to Aunt March. Meg reasoned, pleaded, and commanded, all in vain. Amy protested that she would not go, and Meg left her in despair to ask Hannah what should be done. Before she came back, Laurie walked into the parlor to find Amy sobbing with her head in the sofa cushions. She told her story, expecting to be consoled, but Laurie only put his hands in his pockets and walked about the room whistling softly as he knit his brows in deep thought. Presently, he sat down beside her and said in his most wheedlesome tone, Now, be a sensible little woman, and do as they say. No, don't cry, but hear what a jolly plan I've got. You go to Aunt March's, and I'll come and take you out every day, driving or walking, and we'll have capital times. Won't that be better than moping here? I don't wish to be sent off as if I was in the way, began Amy in an injured voice. Bless your heart, child. It's to keep you well. You don't want to be sick, do you? No, I'm sure I don't, but I dare say I shall be, for I've been with Beth all the time. That's the very reason you ought to go away at once, so that you may escape it. Change of air and care will keep you well, I dare say, or if it does not entirely, you will have the fever more lightly. I advise you to be off as soon as you can, for scarlet fever is no joke, miss. But it's dull at Aunt March's, and she is so cross, said Amy, looking rather frightened. It won't be dull with me popping in every day to tell you how Beth is, and to take you out gallivanting. The old lady likes me, and I'll be as sweet as possible to her, so she won't peck at us, whatever we do. Will you take me out in the trotting wagon with Puck? On my honor as a gentleman. And come every single day? See if I don't. And bring me back the minute Beth is well. The identical minute. And go to the theater, truly? A dozen theaters, if we may. Well, I guess I will. said Amy slowly. Good girl. Call Meg and tell her you'll give in, said Laurie with an approving pat, which annoyed Amy more than the giving in. Meg and Joe came running down to behold the miracle which had been wrought, and Amy, feeling very precious and self-sacrificing, promised to go, if the doctor said Beth was going to be ill. How is the little dear? Asked Laurie, for Beth was his especial pet, and he felt more anxious about her than he liked to show. She's lying down on Mother's bed and feels better. The baby's death troubled her, but I dare say she has only got cold. Hannah says she thinks so, but she looks worried, and that makes me fidgety, answered Meg. What a trying world it is, said Joe, rumpling up her hair in a fretful way. No sooner do we get out of one trouble than down comes another. There doesn't seem to be anything to hold on to when Mother's gone, so I'm all at sea. Well, don't make a porcupine of yourself. It isn't becoming. Settle your wig, Joe, and tell me if I should telegraph to your mother. Or do anything, asked Laurie, who never had been reconciled to the loss of his friend's one beauty. That is what troubles me, said Meg. I think we ought to tell her if Beth is really ill. But Hannah says we mustn't, for Mother can't leave Father, and it will only make them anxious. Beth won't be sick long, and Hannah knows just what to do. And Mother said we were to mind her, so I suppose we must, but it doesn't seem quite right to me. Well, I can't say. Suppose you ask Grandfather after the doctor has been. We will. Joe, go and get Dr. Bangs at once, commanded Meg. We can't decide anything till he has been. Stay where you are, Joe. I'm errand boy to this establishment, said Laurie, taking up his cap. I'm afraid you are busy, began Meg. No, I've done my lessons for the day. Do you study in vacation time? Asked Joe. I follow the good example my neighbors set me, was Laurie's answer, as he swung himself out of the room. I have great hopes for my boy, observed Joe, watching him fly over the fence with an approving smile. He does very well for a boy, was Meg's somewhat ungracious answer, for the subject did not interest her. Dr. Bangs came, said Beth had symptoms of the fever, but he thought she would have it lightly, though he looked sober over the Hummel story. Amy was ordered off at once and provided with something to ward off danger. She departed in great state, with Joe and Laurie as escort. Aunt March received them with her usual hospitality. What do you want now? She asked, looking sharply over her spectacles, while the parrot, sitting on the back of her chair, called out, Go away! No boys allowed here! What? Laurie retired to the window, and Joe told her story. No more than I expected. If you are allowed to go poking about among poor folks, Amy can stay and make herself useful if she isn't sick, which I've no doubt she will be. Looks like it now. Don't cry, child. It worries me to hear people sniff. Amy was on the point of crying, but Laurie slyly pulled the parrot's tail, which caused Polly to utter an astonished croak and called out, Bless my boots! In such a funny way that she laughed instead. What do you hear from your mother? Asked the old lady gruffly. Father is much better, replied Joe, trying to keep sober. Oh, is her? Well, that won't last long, I fancy. March never had any stamina, was the cheerful reply. Ha ha! Never say die! Take a pinch of snuff. Goodbye, goodbye, wha? Squalled Polly, dancing on her perch and clawing at the old lady's cap as Laurie tweaked him in the rear. Hold your tongue, you disrespectful old bird. And Joe, You better go at once. It isn't proper to be gadding about so late with a rattle-pated boy like... Hold your tongue, you disrespectful old bird, cried Polly, tumbling off the chair with a bounce and running to peck the rattle-pated boy, who was shaking with laughter at the last speech. I don't think I can bear it, but I'll try, thought Amy as she was left alone with Aunt March. Get along, you fright, screamed Polly, and at that rude speech, Amy could not restrain a sniff. Chapter 18, Dark Days. Beth did have the fever and was much sicker than anyone but Hannah and the doctor suspected. The girls knew nothing about illness, and Mr. Lawrence was not allowed to see her, so Hannah had everything her own way, and busy Dr. Bangs did his best, but left a good deal to the excellent nurse. Meg stayed at home, lest she should infect the Kings, and kept house, feeling very anxious and a little guilty when she wrote letters in which no mention was made of Beth's illness. She could not think it right to deceive her mother, but she had been bidden to mind Hannah, and Hannah wouldn't hear of Mrs. March being told and worried just for such a trifle. Jo devoted herself to Beth day and night, not a hard task, for Beth was very patient and bore her pain uncomplainingly as long as she could control herself. But there came a time when during the fever fits she began to talk in a hoarse, broken voice, to play on the covertlet as if on her beloved little piano, and trying to sing with a throat so swollen that there was no music left. A time when she did not know the familiar faces around her, but addressed them by wrong names, and called imploringly for her mother. Then Jo grew frightened. Meg begged to be allowed to write the truth, and even Hannah said she would think of it, though there was no danger yet. A letter from Washington added to that trouble, for Mr. March had had a relapse and could not think of coming home for a long while. How dark the days seemed now, how sad and lonely the house, and how heavy were the hearts of the sisters as they worked and waited, while the shadow of death hovered over the once happy home. Then it was that Margaret, sitting alone with tears dropping often on her work, felt how rich she had been in things more precious than any luxuries money could buy, in love, protection, peace, and health, and the real blessings of life. Then it was that Jo, living in the darkened room, with that suffering little sister always before her eyes, and that pathetic voice sounding in her ears, learned to see the beauty and the sweetness of Beth's nature, to feel how deep and tender a place she filled in all hearts, and to acknowledge the worth of Beth's unselfish ambition to live for others and make home happy by that exercise of those simple virtues which all may possess, and which all should love and value more than talent, wealth, or beauty. And Amy, in her exile, longed eagerly to be at home, that she might work for Beth, feeling now that no service would be hard or irksome, and remembering with regretful grief how many neglected tasks those willing hands had done for her. Laurie haunted the house like a restless ghost, and Mr. Lawrence locked the grand piano because he could not bear to be reminded of the young neighbor who used to make the twilight pleasant for him. Everyone missed Beth. The milkman, baker, grocer, and butcher inquired how she did. Poor Mrs. Hummel came to beg pardon for her thoughtlessness, and to get a shroud for Mina. The neighbors sent all sorts of comforts and good wishes, and even those who knew her best were surprised to find how many friends shy little Beth had made. Meanwhile, she lay on her bed with old Joanna at her side, for even in her wanderings she did not forget her forlorn protégé. She longed for her cats, but would not have them brought, lest they should get sick. And in her quiet hours, she was full of anxiety about Joe. She sent loving messages to Amy, bade them tell her mother that she would write soon, and often begged for pencil and paper to try to say a word, that father might not think she had neglected him. But soon even these intervals of consciousness ended, and she lay hour after hour, tossing to and fro with incoherent words on her lips, or sank into a heavy sleep which brought her no refreshment. Dr. Bangs came twice a day. Hannah sat up at night. Meg kept a telegram in her desk all ready to send off at any minute, and Joe never stirred from Beth's side. The 1st of December was a wintry day indeed to them, for a bitter wind blew, snow fell fast, and the year seemed getting ready for its death. When Dr. Bangs came that morning, he looked long at Beth, held the hot hand in both his own for a minute, and laid it gently down, saying in a low voice to Hannah, "If Mrs. March can leave her husband, she'd better be sent for." Hannah nodded without speaking, for her lips twitched nervously. Meg dropped down into a chair as the strength seemed to go out of her limbs at the sound of those words, and Joe, standing with a pale face for a minute, ran to the parlor, snatched up the telegram, and throwing on her things, rushed out into the storm. She was soon back, and while noiselessly taking off her cloak, Laurie came in with a letter saying that Mr. March was mending again. Joe read it thankfully, but the heavy weight did not seem lifted off her heart, and her face was so full of misery that Laurie asked quickly, "What is it? Is Beth worse?" "I've sent for Mother," said Joe, tugging at her rubber boots with a tragic expression. "Good for you, Joe. Did you do it on your own responsibility?" asked Laurie, as he seated her in the hall chair and took off the rebellious boots, seeing how her hands shook. "No, the doctor told us to." "Oh, Joe, it's not so bad as that," cried Laurie with a startled face. "Yes, it is. She doesn't know us. She doesn't even talk about the flocks of green doves, as she calls the vine leaves on the wall. She doesn't look like my Beth, and there's nobody to help us bury. Mother and father both gone, and God seems so far away, I can't find him." As the tears streamed fast down poor Joe's cheeks, she stretched out her hand in a helpless sort of way, as if groping in the dark, and Laurie took it in his, whispering as well as he could with a lump in his throat, "I'm here. Hold on to me, Joe, dear." She could not speak, but she did hold on, and the warm grasp of the friendly human hand comforted her sore heart, and seemed to lead her nearer to the divine arm which alone could uphold her in her trouble. Laurie longed to say something tender and comfortable, but no fitting words came to him, so he stood silent, gently stroking her bent head as her mother used to do. It was the best thing he could have done, far more soothing than the most eloquent words, for Joe felt the unspoken sympathy, and in the silence learned the sweet solace which affection administers to sorrow. Soon she dried the tears which had relieved her and looked up with a grateful face. "Thank you, Teddy. I'm better now. I don't feel so forlorn and will try to bear it if it comes." "Keep hoping for the best. That will help you, Joe. Soon your mother will be here and then everything will be all right." "I'm so glad Father is better. Now she won't feel so bad about leaving him. Oh me, it does seem as if all the troubles came in a heap and I got the heaviest part on my shoulders," sighed Joe, spreading her wet handkerchief over her knees to dry. "Doesn't Meg pull fair?" asked Laurie, looking indignant. "Oh yes, she tries to, but she can't love Bethy as I do, and she won't miss her as I shall. Beth is my conscience, and I can't give her up. I can't. Down went Joe's face into the wet handkerchief, and she cried despairingly, for she had kept up bravely till now, and never shed a tear. Laurie drew his hand across his eyes, but could not speak till he had subdued the choky feeling in his throat and steadied his lips. It might be unmanly, but he couldn't help it, and I am glad of it. Presently, as Joe's sobs quieted, he said hopefully, "I don't think she will die. She's so good, and we all love her so much. I don't believe God will take her away yet." "The good and dear people always do die," groaned Joe. But she stopped crying, for her friend's words cheered her up in spite of her own doubts and fears. "Poor girl, you're worn out. It isn't like you to be forlorn. Stop a bit. I'll hearten you up in a jiffy." Laurie went off 2 stairs at a time, and Joe laid her wearied head down on Beth's little brown hood, which no one had thought of moving from the table where she left it. It must have possessed some magic, for the submissive spirit of its gentle owner seemed to enter into Joe, and when Laurie came running down with a glass of wine, she took it with a smile and said bravely, "I drink health to my Beth. You are a good doctor, Teddy, and such a comfortable friend. How can I ever pay you?" she added, as the wine refreshed her body, as the kind words had done her troubled mind. "I'll send my bill by and by, and tonight I'll give you something that will warm the cockles of your heart better than quarts of wine," said Laurie, beaming at her with a face of suppressed satisfaction at something. "What is it?" cried Joe, forgetting her woes for a minute in her wonder. "I telegraphed to your mother yesterday, and Brooke answered she'd come at once, and she'll be here tonight, and everything will be all right. Aren't you glad I did it?" Laurie spoke very fast and turned red and excited all in a minute, for he had kept his plot a secret for fear of disappointing the girls or harming Beth. Joe grew quite white, flew out of her chair, and the moment he stopped speaking, she electrified him by throwing her arms round his neck and crying out with a joyful cry, "Oh, Laurie! Oh, Mother! I am so glad!" She did not weep again, but laughed hysterically and trembled and clung to her friend as if she was a little bewildered by the sudden news. Laurie, though decidedly amazed, behaved with great presence of mind. He patted her back soothingly. Finding that she was recovering, followed it up by a bashful kiss or two, which brought Joe round at once. Holding on to the banisters, she put him gently away, saying breathlessly, "Oh, don't! I didn't mean to. It was dreadful of me. But you were such a dear to go and do it in spite of Hannah that I couldn't help flying at you. Tell me all about it, and don't give me wine again. It makes me act so." "I don't mind," laughed Laurie, as he settled his tie. "Why, you see, I got fidgety, and so did Grandpa. We thought Hannah was overdoing the authority business, and your mother ought to know. She'd never forgive us if if anything happened, you know. So I got Grandpa to say it was high time we did something, and off I pelted to the office yesterday for the doc to look sober. And Hannah most took my head off when I proposed a telegram. I never can bear to be lorded over, so that settled my mind, and I did it. Your mother will come, I know, and the late train is in at 2 a.m. I shall go for her, and you've only got to bottle up your rapture and keep Beth quiet till that blessed lady gets here." "Laurie, you're an angel. How shall I ever thank you?" "Fly at me again. I rather liked it," said Laurie, looking mischievous, a thing he had not done for a fortnight. "No, thank you. I'll do it by proxy when your grandpa comes. Don't tease, but go home and rest, for you'll be up half the night. Bless you, Teddy. Bless you." Joe had backed into a corner, and as she finished her speech, she vanished precipitately into the kitchen, where she sat down upon a dresser and told the assembled cats that she was happy, oh so happy, while Laura departed, feeling that he had made a rather neat thing of it. "That's the interferingest chap I ever see, but I forgive him and do hope Mrs. March is coming right away," said Hannah with an air of relief when Joe told the good news. Meg had a quiet rapture. Meg had a quiet rapture and then brooded over the letter, while Joe set the sick room in order, and Hannah knocked up a couple of pies in case of company unexpected. A breath of fresh air seemed to blow through the house, and something better than sunshine brightened the quiet rooms. Everything appeared to feel the hopeful change. Beth's bird began to chirp again, and a half-blown rose was discovered on Amy's bush in the window. The fire seemed to burn with unusual cheeriness, and every time the girls met, their pale faces broke into smiles as they hugged one another, whispering encouragingly, "Mother's coming, dear, Mother's coming." Everyone rejoiced but Beth. She lay in that heavy stupor, alike unconscious of hope and joy, doubt and danger. It was a piteous sight. The once rosy face so changed and vacant. The once busy hands so weak and wasted. The once smiling lips quite dumb. And the once pretty, well-kept hair scattered rough and tangled on the pillow. All day she say so, only rousing now and then the mother, "Water," with lips so parched they could hardly shape the word. All day Joe and Meg hovered over her, watching, waiting, hoping, and thrusting in God and Mother. And all day the snow fell, the bitter wind raged, and the hours dragged slowly by. But night came fast. But night came at last, and every time the clock struck, the sisters, still sitting on either side of the bed, looked at each other with brightening eyes, for each hour brought help nearer. The doctor had been in to say that some change, for better or worse, would probably take place about midnight, at which time he would return. Hannah, quite worn out, lay down on the sofa at the bed's foot and fell fast asleep. Mr. Lawrence marched to and fro in the parlor, feeling that he would rather face a rebel battery than Mrs. March's countenance as she entered. Laurie lay on the rug, pretending to rest, but staring into the fire with a thoughtful look which made his black eyes beautifully soft and clear. The girls never forgot that night, for no sleep came to them as they kept their watch, with that dreadful sense of powerlessness which comes to us in hours like those. "If God spares Beth, I never will complain again," whispered Meg earnestly. "If God spares Beth, I'll try to love and serve him all my life," answered Joe with equal fervor. "I wish I had no heart. It aches so," sighed Meg after a pause. "If life is often as hard as this, I don't see how we ever shall get through it," added her sister despondently. Here the clock struck 12, and both forgot themselves in watching Beth, for they fancied a change passed over her wan face. The house was still as death, and nothing but the wailing of the wind broke the deep hush. Weary Hannah slept on, and no one but the sisters saw the pale shadow which seemed to fall upon the little bed. An hour went by, and nothing happened except Laurie's quiet departure for the station. Another hour, still no one came. The anxious fears of delay in the storm, or accidents by the way, or worst of all, a great grief at Washington, haunted the girls. It was past 2 when Joe, who stood at the window, thinking how dreary the world looked in the winding sheet of snow, heard a movement by the bed, and turning quickly, saw Meg kneeling before their mother's easy chair with her face hidden. A dreadful fear passed coldly over Joe as she thought, "Beth is dead, and Meg is afraid to tell me." She was back at her post in an instant, and to her excited eyes a great change seems to have taken place. The fever flush and the look of pain were gone, and the beloved little face looked so pale and peaceful in its utter repose that Joe felt no desire to weep or to lament. Leaning low over this dearest of her sisters, she kissed the damp forehead with her heart on her lips, and softly whispered, "Goodbye, my Beth, goodbye." As if awakened by the stir, Hannah started out of her sleep, hurried to the bed, looked at Beth, felt her hands, listened at her lips, and then throwing her apron over her head, sat down to rock to and fro, exclaiming under her breath, "The fever's turned. She's sleeping natural. Her skin's damp and her breath's easy. Praise be given. Oh my goodness me." Before the girls could believe the happy truth, the doctor came to confirm it. He was a homely man, but they thought his face quite heavenly when he smiled and said with a fatherly look at them, "Yes, my dears, I think the little girl will pull through this time. Keep the house quiet, let her sleep, and when she awakes, give her—" What they were to give her neither heard, for both crept into the dark hall, and sitting on the stairs held each other close, rejoicing with hearts too full for words. When they went back to be kissed and cuddled by faithful Hannah, they found Beth lying, as she used to do, with her cheek pillowed on her hand, the dreadful pallor gone, and breathing quietly as if just falling asleep. "If Mother would only come now," said Joe, as the winter night began to wane. "See," said Meg, coming up with a white half-open rose. I thought this would hardly be ready to lay in Beth's hand tomorrow if she went away from us, but it has blossomed in the night, and now I mean to put it in my vase here, so that when the darling wakes, the first thing she sees will be the little rose and Mother's face." Never had the sun risen so beautifully, and never had the world seemed so lovely as it did to the heavy eyes of Meg and Joe as they looked out in the early morning when their long, sad vigil was done. When the long, sad vigil was done. "It looks like a fairy world," said Meg, smiling to herself as she stood behind the curtain, watching the dazzling sight. "Hark!" cried Joe, starting to her feet. Yes, there was a sound of bells at the door below, a cry from Hannah, and then Laura's voice saying in a joyful whisper, "Girls, she's come! She's come!" Chapter 19, Amy's Will. While these things were happening at home, Amy was having hard times at Aunt March's. She felt her exile deeply, and for the first time in her life realized how much she was beloved and petted at home. Aunt March never petted anyone. She did not approve of it, but she meant to be kind, for the well-behaved little girl pleased her very much, and Aunt March had a soft place in her old heart for her nephew's children, though she didn't think it proper to confess it. She really did her best to make Amy happy, but dear me, what mistakes she made. Some old people keep young at heart in spite of wrinkles and gray hairs, can sympathize with children's little cares and joys, make them feel at home, and can hide wise lessons under pleasant plays, giving and receiving friendship in the sweetest way. But Aunt March had not this gift, and she worried Amy very much with her rules and orders, her prim ways and long prosy talks. Finding the child more docile and amiable than his sister, the old lady felt it her duty to try and counteract as far as possible the bad effects of home, freedom, and indulgence. So she took Amy by the hand and taught her as she herself had been taught 60 years ago, a process which carried dismay to Amy's soul and made her feel like a fly in the web of a very strict spider. She had to wash the cups every morning and polish up the old-fashioned spoons, the fat silver teapot, and the glasses till they all shone. Then she must dust the room, and what a trying job that was. Not a speck escaped Aunt March's eyes. And all the furniture had claw legs and much carving, which was never dusted to suit. Then Polly had to be fed, the lapdog combed, and a dozen trips upstairs and downstairs to get things or deliver orders, for the old lady was very lame and seldom left her big chair. After these tiresome labors, she must do her lessons, which was a daily trial of every virtue she possessed. Then she was allowed 1 hour for exercise or play, and didn't she enjoy it? Laurie came every day and wheedled Aunt March till Amy was allowed to go out with him, when they walked and rode and had capital times. After dinner, she had to read aloud and sit still while the old lady slept, which she usually did for an hour as she dropped off over the first page. Then patchwork or towels appeared, and Amy sewed with outward meekness and inward rebellion till dusk, when she was allowed to amuse herself as she liked till tea time. The evenings were the worst of all, for Aunt March fell to telling long stories about her youth, which were so unutterably dull that Amy was always ready to go to bed, intending to cry over her hard fate, but usually going to sleep before she had squeezed out more than a tear or two. If it had not been for Laurie and old Esther, The maid, she felt that she could never have got through that dreadful time. The parrot alone was enough to drive her distracted, for he soon felt that she did not admire him and revenged himself by being as mischievous as possible. He pulled her hair whenever she came near him, upset his bread and milk to plague her when she had newly cleaned his cage, made Mop bark by pecking at him while Madam dozed, called her names before company, and behaved in all respects like an reprehensible old bird. Then she could not endure the dog, a fat, cross beast who snarled and yelped at her when she made his toilet, and who lay on his back with all his legs in the air and the most idiotic expression of countenance when he wanted something to eat, which was about a dozen times a day. The cook was bad-tempered, the old coachman was deaf, and Esther the only one who ever took any notice of the young lady. Esther was a French woman who had lived with Madame, as she called her mistress, for many years, who rather tyrannized over the old lady, who could not get along without her. Her real name was Estelle, but Aunt March ordered her to change it, and she obeyed, on condition that she was never asked to change her religion. She took a fancy to Mademoiselle, and amused her very much with odd stories of her life in France. When Amy sat with her while she got up Madame's laces, she also allowed her to roam about the great house and examine the curious and pretty things stored away in the big wardrobes and the ancient chests, for Aunt March hoarded like a magpie. Amy's chief delight was an Indian cabinet full of queer drawers, little pigeonholes and secret places in which were kept all sorts of ornaments, some precious, some merely curious, all more or less antique. To examine and arrange these things gave Amy great satisfaction, especially the jewel cases, in which on velvet cushions reposed the ornaments which had adorned a belle 40 years ago. There was the garnet set which Aunt March wore when she came out, the pearls her father gave her on her wedding day, her lover's diamonds, the jet mourning rings and pins, the queer lockets with portraits of dead friends and weeping willows made of hair inside, the baby bracelets her one little daughter had worn, Uncle March's big watch with the red seal so many childish hands had played with, and in a box, all by itself, lay Aunt March's wedding ring, too small now for her fat finger, but put carefully away like the most precious jewel of them all. "Which would Mademoiselle choose if she had her will?" asked Esther, who always sat near to watch over and lock up the valuables. "I like the diamonds best, but there is no necklace among them, and I'm fond of necklaces. They are so becoming. I should choose this if I might," replied Amy, looking with great admiration at a string of gold and ebony beads, from which hung a heavy cross of the same. "I too covet that, but not as a necklace. Ah, no, to me it is a rosary, and as such I should use it like a good Catholic," said Esther, eyeing the handsome thing wistfully. "Is it meant to use as you use the string of good-smelling wooden beads hanging over your glass?" asked Amy. "Truly, yes, to pray with. It would be pleasing to the saints if one used so fine a rosary as this, instead of wearing it as a vain bijou." "You seem to take a great deal of comfort in your prayers, Esther, and always come down looking quiet and satisfied. I wish I could." "If Mademoiselle was a Catholic, she would find true comfort. But as that it is not to be, it would be well if you went apart each day to meditate and pray, as did the good mistress whom I served before Madame. she had a little chapel, and in it found solacement for much trouble. Would it be right for me to do so too? Asked Amy, who in her loneliness felt the need of help of some sort, and found that she was apt to forget her little book now that Beth was not there to remind her of it. It would be excellent and charming, and I shall gladly arrange the little dressing room for you if you like. If you like it, say nothing to Madame, but when she sleeps, go you and sit alone a while to think good thoughts and pray the dear God preserve your sister. Esther was truly pious and quite sincere in her advice, for she had an affectionate heart and felt much for the sisters in her anxiety. Amy liked the idea and gave her leave to arrange the light closet next her room, hoping it would do her good. I wish I knew where all these pretty things would go when Aunt March dies, she said, as she slowly replaced the shining rosary and shut the jewel cases one by one. To you and your sisters, I know it. Madame confides in me. I witnessed her will, and it is to be so, whispered Esther, smiling. How nice! But I wish she'd let us have them now. Procrastination is not agreeable, observed Amy, taking a last look at the diamonds. It is too soon yet for the young ladies to wear these things. The first one who is affianced will have the pearls. Madame has said it, and I have a fancy that a little turquoise ring will be given to you when you go, for Madame approves your good behavior and charming manners. Do you think so? Oh, I'll be a lamb if I can only have that lovely ring. It's ever so much prettier than Kitty Bryant's. I do like Aunt March after all. And Amy tried on the blue ring with a delighted face and a firm resolve to earn it. From that day she was a model of obedience, and the old lady complacently admired the success of her training. Esther fitted up the closet with a little table, placed a footstool before it, and over it a picture taken from one of the shut-up rooms. She thought it was of no great value, but being appropriate, she borrowed it, well knowing that Madame would never know it, nor care if she did. It was, however, a very valuable copy of one of the famous pictures of the world, and Amy's beauty-loving eyes were never tired of looking up at the sweet face of the Divine Mother, while her tender thoughts of her own were busy at her heart. On the table she laid her little testament and hymn book, kept a vase always full of the best flowers Laurie brought her, and came every day to sit alone, thinking good thoughts, and praying the dear God to preserve her sister. Esther had given her a rosary of black beads with a silver cross, but Amy hung it up and did not use it, feeling doubtful as to its fitness for Protestant prayers. The little girl was very sincere in all this, for being left alone outside the safe home nest, she felt the need of some kind hand to hold by so sorely that she instinctively turned to the strong and tender friend whose fatherly love most closely surrounds his little children. She missed her mother's help to understand the rule herself, but having been taught where to look, she did her best to find the way and walk in it confidingly. But Amy was a young pilgrim, and just now her burden seemed very heavy. She tried to forget herself, to keep cheerful, and be satisfied with her doing right, though no one saw or praised her for it. In her first effort at being very, very good, she decided to make her will, as Aunt March had done, so that if she did fall ill and die, her possessions might be justly and generously divided. It cost her a pang even to think of giving up the little treasures which in her eyes were as precious as the old lady's jewels. During one of her play hours, she wrote out the important document as well as she could, with some help from Esther as to certain legal terms. And when the good-natured Frenchwoman had signed her name, Amy felt relieved and laid it by to show Laurie, whom she wanted as a second witness. As it was a rainy day, she went upstairs to amuse herself in one of the large chambers and took Polly with her for company. In this room there was a wardrobe full of old-fashioned costumes with which Esther allowed her to play, and it was her favorite amusement to array herself in the faded brocades and parade up and down before the long mirror, making stately curtsies and sweeping her train about with a rustle which delighted her ears. So busy was she on this day that she did not hear Laurie's ring, nor see his face peeping in at her as she gravely promenaded to and fro, flirting her fan and tossing her head, on which she wore a great pink turban, contrasting oddly with her blue brocade dress and yellow quilted petticoat. She was obliged to walk carefully, for she had on high-heeled shoes. And as Laurie told Joe afterward, it was a comical sight to see her mince along in her gay suit, with Polly saddling and bridling just behind her, imitating her as well as he could, and occasionally stopping to laugh or exclaim, "Aren't we fine? Get along, you fright! Hold your tongue! Kiss me, dear! Ha, ha!" Having with difficulty restrained an explosion of merriment, lest it should offend Her Majesty, Laurie tapped and was graciously received. "Sit down and rest while I put these things away. Then I want to consult you about a very serious matter," said Amy, when she had shown her splendor and driven Polly into a corner. "That bird is the trial of my life," she continued, removing the pink mountain from her head, while Laurie seated himself astride a chair. "Yesterday, when Aunt was asleep and I was trying to be as still as a mouse, Polly began to squall and flap about in his cage, so I went to let him out, and I found a big spider there. I poked it out, and it ran under the bookcase. Polly marched straight after it, stooped down and peeped under the bookcase, saying in his funny way, with a cock of his eye, 'Come out and take a walk, my dear.' I couldn't help laughing, which made Paul swear, and Aunt woke up and scolded us both." "Did the spider accept the old fellow's invitation?" asked Laurie, yawning. "Yes, it came, and away ran Polly, frightened to death, and scrambled up on Aunt's chair, calling out, 'Catch her, catch her, catch her,' as I chased the spider." "That's a lie! Oh, Lord!" cried the parrot, pecking at Laurie's toes. "I'd wring your neck if you were mine, you old torment," cried Laurie, shaking his fist at the bird, who put his head on one side and gravely croaked, "Hallelujah! Bless your buttons, dear! What?" "Now I'm ready," said Amy, shutting the wardrobe and taking a piece of paper out of her pocket. "I want you to read that, please, and tell me if it is legal and right. I felt I ought to do it, for life is uncertain, and I don't want any ill feeling over my tomb." Laurie bit his lips, and turning a little from the pensive speaker, read the following document with praiseworthy gravity, considering the spelling. "My last will and testament. I, Amy Curtis March, being in my sane mind, go give and bequeath all my earthly property, vis-a-vis to wit, namely, to my father, my best pictures, sketches, maps, and works of art, including frames, also my $100 to do what he likes with. To my mother, all my clothes except the blue apron with pockets, Also my likeness and my medal with much love. To my dear sister Margaret, I give my turquoise ring, if I get it. Also my green box with the doves on it. Also my piece of real lace for her neck, and my sketch of her as a memorial of her little girl. To Joe, I leave my breastpin, the one mended with sealing wax. Also my bronze inkstand, she lost the cover, and my most precious plaster rabbit, because I'm sorry I burned up her story. To Beth, if she lives after me, I give my dolls and little bureau, my fan, my linen collars, and my new slippers if she can wear them, being thin when she gets well. And I herewith also leave her my regret that I ever made fun of old Joanna. To my friend and neighbor Theodore Lawrence, I bequeath my paper mache portfolio, my clay model of a house, though he did say it hadn't any neck. Oh, my clay model of a horse, though he did say it didn't have any neck. Also, in return for his great kindness in the hour of affliction, any one of my artistic works he lacks. Notre Dame is the best. To our venerable benefactor, Mr. Lawrence, I leave my purple box with a looking glass in the cover, which will be nice for his pens, and remind him of the departed girl who thanks him for his favors to her family, especially Beth. I wish my favorite playmate, Kitty Bryant, to have the blue silk apron and my gold bead ring with a kiss. To Hannah, I give the bandbox she wanted and all the patchwork I leave, hoping she will remember me when it you see. And now, having disposed of my most valuable property, I hope all will be satisfied and not blame the dead. I forgive everyone and trust we may all meet when the trump shall sound. Amen. To this will and testament I set my hand and seal on this 20th day of November, Anni Domino, 1861. Amy Curtis March. Witness Estelle Valnor, Theodore Lawrence. The last name was written in pencil, and Amy explained that he was to rewrite it in ink and seal it up for her properly. What put it into your head? Did anyone tell you about Beth's giving away her things? Asked Laurie soberly, as Amy laid a bit of red tape with sealing wax, a taper, and a standish before him. She explained and then asked anxiously, "What about Beth?" I'm sorry I spoke, but as I did, I'll tell you. She felt so ill one day that she told Joe she wanted to give her piano to Meg, her cats to you, and the poor old doll to Joe, who would love it for her sake. She was so sorry she had so little to give and left locks of her hair to the rest of us, and her best love to Grandpa. She never thought of a will. Laurie was signing and sealing as he spoke, and did not look up till a great tear dropped on the paper. Amy's face was full of trouble, but she only said, "Don't people put sort of postscripts to their wills sometimes?" "Yes, codicils, they call them." Put one in mine then, that I wish all my curls cut off and given round to my friends. I forgot it, but I want it done though it will spoil my looks. Laurie added it, smiling at Amy's last and greatest sacrifice. Then he amused her for an hour and was much interested in all her trials. But when he came to go, Amy held him back to whisper with trembling lips, "Is there really any danger about Beth?" "I'm afraid there is, but we must hope for the best, so don't cry, dear." And Laurie put his arm about her with a brotherly gesture, which was very comforting. When he had gone, she went to her little chapel and sitting in the twilight prayed for Beth, with streaming tears and an aching heart, feeling that 1,000,000 turquoise rings would not console her for the loss of her gentle little sister.